order. I'm not sure if we have quorum, but we will take a roll call in just a moment. Thank you all for joining us. This will be the county executive's last discussion with this council because obviously something's happening next Tuesday that we are all familiar with. So we just want to take an opportunity today, not only to have the county executive offer his remarks. I will have a few of my own, and then if anyone has anything they'd like to say. We've had a great time over these last many years with this particular council, but also in your role as county executive. So we just had a great time, and also it's been productive and effective and efficient. So all those things we should make public note of as well, and we will. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunities to do more of this, but for our purposes, we'd like to have that opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. So if you wouldn't mind.
I will.
Taking roll.
Okay. Chair Taylor.
I am here.
The Honorable Annette Blackwell. Present. Ravenous doesn't appear to be here. Denise Contreras. Helen Cotter is not here right now. Mr. McShepard, Randall McShepard.
Present.
Glenn Shoemate.
Present.
Yanela Sims.
Present.
I've heard from Dr. Heidi Gullett, Habiba Grimes, Marsha Maccabee, Dr. Charles Modlin, India Pierce-Lee will not be here today. Levine Ross.
Here.
And Sheila Wright is not here as of yet.
Okay, all right, very good. Not sure if that qualifies as a quorum, but it looks close enough, so I'll say yes.
Yes, we do have a quorum.
All right, thank
Yes.
you. Moment of silence and reflection.
Thank you. Tuesday, November 8th is the midterm elections. I am more convinced than ever that we must not only vote, but we must encourage, facilitate, and help everyone we know to vote. In theory, the Constitution of the United States of America applies to all citizens. The Constitution refers to the right to vote on 5 different times. Yet it wasn't until 1870 only white men were allowed to vote. Fortunately, 2 constitutional amendments subsequently changed that. The 15th Amendment extended voting rights to men of all races. However, this amendment was not enough because, as we all know, African Americans were still denied the right to vote by state constitutions and laws, poll taxes, literary tests, grandfather clause, and outright acts of intimidation and violence. Women did not have the right to vote until the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. But finally, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 secured voting rights for adult citizens of all races. The act was instituted to overcome legal barriers at the state and local levels that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote as guaranteed under the amendment. This act is considered by many to be the most effective and far-reaching piece of federal civil rights legislation ever. So we must vote because voting is a right, voting is a responsibility, and voting is a privilege. These are not mutually exclusive. Some might discourage us from voting, and despite what some people might have us believe, voting is one of the most sacred acts for each American. Thomas Jefferson said, and I quote, "We do not have a government of the majority. We have a government of the majority who participate, and you all must participate." Voting represents a freedom because it is when in America we give power to someone to make decisions over our lives. It is a time when we trust our voices will be heard. Representative John Lewis said, and I quote, "The vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have in a democracy." And Susan B. Anthony said, "Someone struggled for your right to vote. Use it." As a child, I can recall walking with my mother to the local school that served as the voting place for our New York City community. And on Tuesday, I will continue that tradition, which is my right, my responsibility, and my privilege. I will vote.
Thank you. It's interesting. I didn't know what the topic would be, but it comes on the heels of, and I'm not calling anyone out within our own series of companies, but one of the leads of one of my partner companies sent out a memo today. It's a majority company, sent out a memo today giving us flexibility and the team around, I say us, the team around flexibility on Tuesday to vote. Take your time, supervisors can mark your cards, but what was interesting in that memo was the comment around all the soldiers who have given their lives to protect this right to vote. And while that is wholly true, and important and critical. The memo, and this is our own awareness, and I'll have the conversation, the memo didn't comment on the women who soldiered through suffrage to gain a right. It didn't comment on the soldiers who dealt with the civil rights issues for the right to vote. Yes, we know that wars were fought and won for this. We also know that individuals have protected this country for that purpose. But even within this country, the comments you made around women and minorities was lost in that memo. So I have to make sure that we constantly remind folks that it wasn't just that, because that didn't guarantee anything for a whole swath of this population. So thank you for those comments, and it's illustrative of the comments and the work that still needs to be done to make sure there's some complete understanding. All right. Sorry for my own soapbox, but any other comments on the reflection?
Wilson?
Okay. All right. Good. Any public comments?
We have not received any public comment via the email equity@Cuyahoga County, US, and it doesn't appear that today we have any attendees who want to give a public comment. So we can now move on.
Okay. Sir?
Thank you. Well, as Eddie started out, this will be, I think, my last CACE meeting, because my term ends at the end of this year, and I chose not to run for reelection. I do want to, though, spend just a minute thanking all of you for the hard work and all you do, both in your personal lives, which is why we selected each one of you to be on this committee, and what you're doing here on behalf of the county. So I just want to let you know it's really important. The work you do as a committee, the interviews you've had, the recommendations you've made, and that you continue to make as part of this group, the personal conversations I've had with many of you. People on this committee tend not to be shy, and are very good about letting me know what we should be doing that we're not, and that what we're doing that's good also. So that's very valuable, and I truly appreciate it. And it was about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, we set up, we passed a resolution declaring racism as a public health problem and crisis, and we followed through on a variety of efforts to try to do better. And Lenora has been on staff helping us, and while it's not the job or the responsibility of Nayla professionally she's personally taken on this role and has really moved us forward, so I appreciate that a lot. And of course, all of you and Eddie leading this effort. I just wanted to go through real quickly. I can't possibly identify all the things that we do that impact equity or are driven by equity as a county, because, to be honest, most of what we do is related to promoting equity, and not as part of any specific rule or requirement, but just what we do. I mean, when we do health and human services, given the nature of our county, it tends to be very pro-equity. So, and that's more than half of what we do. So, what we do has always been to further equity in the community, but now we do even more. And thanks to, again, to what this committee has promoted. So, we got some ARPA money, and we've talked about that, but I just want to recap a little bit some of the things that are impacting equity that we're doing with that ARPA money. We have put $1.5 million into testing and tracing in underserved areas. We teamed up with Metro and the Board of Health for the county, and are continuing to reach out, not just now in testing and tracing, but in terms of vaccines as well. We put $5 million additional above what we always do into the new building for the food bank. And anybody who's had a chance to go over there, it's really going to enhance the ability of the food bank to serve people who are hungry in this community. And we're very proud that we were a major participant in that. We have spent lots of money on PPE for first responders, for teachers, for nurses, for hospitals around the community. And again, places, like the clinic and UH, they can afford to do their own thing, but, the services we provide are primarily benefiting people who are generally not served. We've distributed, by the way, 27 million items of PPE since this all started. And again, much of that has gone to people who would not have access to it without us. Workforce, we've done a whole lot in terms of training, promotion, placing. We have a sector partnership in manufacturing. Was our first effort, first big effort. And last year, I believe we trained and placed 500 people in manufacturing jobs. We are now devoting another $9 million to enhance that, to make sure we get that 500 up to 2,500, we've been told shouldn't be a problem annually, and helping more students, more young people understand that they have a potential career in manufacturing. And so we'll be going into the schools and doing that as part of the efforts. We'll be providing funds for internships, which is critical for people to understand and get experience that they otherwise couldn't get. Some of you have read, which the newspaper loves to talk about, the people, the kids that we end up having responsibility for, that parents can't handle them or won't handle them, and they end up getting dropped off at our Jane Edna Hunter office building. And we can't just not take them. We immediately go about trying to place them in a place where they could stay. And for some 90% of the kids, we can get them placed in a couple hours. It's the handful of the most difficult, the most disturbed, the ones that are hurting the most, that many places won't take. They just won't take them. Many residential facilities won't take them. Some residential facilities are just closed, like Palmerdale, but there's many more that just are there, but they won't take the tough ones. And the word goes out in the community somehow, who are the kids that are the toughest to handle. So they end up staying historically stayed in our office building, have to sleep somewhere. We're not going to put them outside in the street. We have gone through 3 or 4 rounds of RFPs asking for bids for places, and basically uncapped any expense. Tell us what it'll cost, and we need a place to put these kids. We got nobody responding to the first 3 of those, I believe. Finally, we got one recently. The Centers for Families and Children have combined, I think they've actually merged with the Christian Children's Home, and they have agreed to a contract with us. It's going to be very expensive to take our kids with no reject and no eject, which is a critical component. They won't say no, and they won't throw them out. We'll see if it works. We're also working on plans B and C to in case it doesn't work, because we've had experience, but those kids need a place to go. We are responsible for serving people who don't have homes. And so we have homeless shelters in town. We are redoing our homeless shelters. We have bought a second building for the men and are redoing that. We are completely remodeling the existing men's shelter to provide more privacy, more dignity, if you will, for people in the shelters. It's going to cost us We're devoting $20 million to that project, but it's money well spent, in my view. Lead mitigation, we put money in every year. We're adding another $1.8 million from our ARPA funds to help get lead out of the homes in our community. We're providing another $2 million in small business grants to help small businesses. Most of that goes to minorities and women-owned businesses. We are, Randall knows this very well, we're spending some money on to take those scarred properties around the community, those properties that in many cases had homes that were demolished, and we're turning them into parks and gardens. We're not doing it, we're helping fund, but Randall and Sarah Continenza from Food Strong are handling that, and it's a small but critically important project, and it can make a real difference to a neighborhood. Rather than have a vacant lot that's overgrown, and you have something that's productive. So thank you for that. Affordable housing, we're putting another $3 million into affordable housing to encourage developers to include affordable housing in their developments. We're putting $3 million of ARPA money into that project. In the central neighborhood, you may know that we've focused a surge. We've been surging as much of our resources as we can free up for the central neighborhood to see if we can make a difference, a real difference in one particular neighborhood. And we're putting another $2.5 million into that effort on top of what we're already doing to include social services, enhance small business efforts, and bring jobs to people who reside there, and we're improving their rec center. We want people to get through school. So it was surprising to me to learn that there are many students that go to school and have to leave for some reason. And often when they leave, they have a debt. It might be very small, for labs and whatever else, books and things like that. And then they decide, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, 2 years later to go back to school. They can't go back to school. If they owe money to their prior school, no matter what the amount is, they can't get their transcript. And if they can't get their transcript, they can't go to another school. They can't even go back to the same school. So we are paying off those bills for people in order to let them go back to school. And that's going to cost us a couple $1 million. We have already spent as a community $50 million in demolishing blighted properties. We're putting another $2.5 million into that. And I can tell you again, that's equity. I mean, I remember going when I was campaigning to a neighborhood in East Cleveland, and I was talking to a woman outside of her home, and she tells me, she says, I'd like to move, and I can't sell my house because on this side, and she points to the house that's vacant. She said, that house is a drug house, and people are coming and going, selling drugs, buying drugs all the time, and you can't, that's not a desirable property to live next to. And then she points to the other side. She says that's a trash dump. If you look in the yard, there's trash all over. People come and just dump their trash there. So, these properties that are blighted need to be removed, and then hopefully things like what Randall's doing, makes a difference to improve those lots. Broadband, we've learned in the pandemic how critical it is that people have access to the internet, whether it's for school or whether it's for jobs or healthcare, whatever it is. People need access these days to the internet. And at first, it's not available everywhere, but even more important, in Northeast Ohio, it may be available, but it's too expensive. So we made a partnership with the state of Ohio Governor DeWine has been so supportive. John Husted came into town. It's a $20 million project. We're going to cover the suburbs, and the city of Cleveland's working on their own project to cover the city. So we will go from one of the worst connected areas in the country to one of the best connected areas in the country when this is all done. We're very proud of that. We're putting almost $3 million into the Hitchcock Center, which is a behavioral health service program for women with children. They can't, there's not a lot of places you can go if you got a kid. That's one of them, and we're supporting that project. Rental assistance, there's still, to this point, lots of people who can't pay their rent, in many cases because of the pandemic. They lost a job or for whatever reason, they can't make the payments. We initially got $25 million to help people with rental assistance. We were able, through various aggressive planning and outreach, we upped that to $100 million. We have more money in Cuyahoga County for rental assistance than anybody in Ohio. And we're trying to get it out there. We've already managed to, it's got to be distributed by the end of the year. If anybody knows of any, when we're working with partners, we're doing everything we can. Sarah Parks Jackson is our lead on that. And I think we've already distributed about $70 million of that out into the communities, and we want to try to get as much of that because we have to turn it back in if we don't finish getting it out there by the end of the year. You all know that the Supreme Court has now left it to the states to deal with abortion. That's going to be very, very difficult for many women. And, unfortunately, Ohio immediately, after the Supreme Court said, states do what you want, Ohio immediately put in their heartbeat bill, which basically says no abortions after six weeks. And many women don't even know they're pregnant in the first 6 weeks. So it's a terrible situation. We can't undo that, but we did come out and say that we will support travel and lodging for women who want to travel to some place where it's legal to get an abortion. And that's going to cost us $500,000 right now. $500,000. And then not just rental assistance, but we want people to still be able to take advantage of the so-called American dream and get a home. And it's very difficult to afford a home. So we're doing a pilot project in Bedford Heights, Garfield Heights, Maple Heights, North Randall, and Warrensville. Maple Heights is in it there, for down payment assistance to help people who want to buy a home, 0% loans, up to $15,000 for down payments. So those are some of the things we're doing. I can assure you they all impact equity, and we're doing a whole lot more than that, but I just wanted to give you an idea. We're actively out there. I think the county can be very proud of what we're doing. And again, your efforts, your pushing, your impetus, every time I come down here, how come you're not doing this or that? And that's good. I mean, that's what you should be doing. And I hope that you'll all continue working just as hard going forward with the new county executive, and make sure he is responsive to your thoughts, because you're very smart, very good people. So thank you all so much for what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, County Executive Bush. That list is impressive and long because the work has been hard and you've been diligent about it. So those are great accomplishments, more to be done. And yes, we do give you a hard time from time to time, but we also recognize that so much has been impacted by your leadership and your tenure as county executive. A few days ago, Mayor Blackwell and I, along with others, were at the Cuyahoga County Mayors and Managers Association annual, and it's an opportunity for the mayors and managers to provide the George Winovich Award for Leadership and Service to individuals in town who have served, and generally politically, but Dick Pogue has been an honoree and others have been honorees. This past Wednesday, State Senator Matt Dolan was an honoree, along with our own County Executive Budish. So we had family there, of course, Amy and others. And Mayor, what do you think? 20 or 30 mayors in the photo opportunity with, with you?
Almost 50.
Almost 50, so I undercounted. So please help me in sort of recounting some of what was said. I can start by saying the thing that struck me, in addition to this list, was the list while Armin served as the Speaker of the House as well, in the legislature, and how he was willing, and Cassandra Williams, who we know ran for mayor, most recently now works for Spectrum, and as spokesperson for Spectrum, commented on the honorees, and the comment that you heard, and it rang true and it was repeated, how he worked across the aisle throughout his tenure in the State House, but also how, as you just described, equity was a part of it. So when measures needed to be taken to ensure that folks of color were in the conversation around construction projects or any host of issues which affected not only Northeast Ohio, but the state, this gentleman was there at the ready and willing to help in those efforts. So these comments that you've made around equity being embedded in all that you do, this isn't new, right? This isn't 8 years young. This is a history that is well recounted and described by all those who spoke on your behalf. So more to say, but I wanted just to offer to this group that this is real, and it's been real for some time. Yeah, mistakes made, more to do, but true to who he is, and at his core, at his heart, these have been things that he's pursued and made better. So I would say that to start, please.
Well said, Chair. Very well said. You know me, I shoot straight. You missed an opportunity. There was a missed opportunity that night to talk about what you do for cities with leaders of color. They were not represented on that screen. And I say that because of how much you've done for Maple Heights. That story didn't get told. It did not get told. But the story is, and I want to tell it here since it wasn't told in front of the other mayors, so I'll tell it in front of this room. Maple Heights was in fiscal emergency. When I took office in 2016, your administration had closed Jobs and Family Services, which is one of our largest employers. That was a significant hit. People were yelling. There was a protest planned, as you and I know, our story of how we came to know one another. And everyone was banging on my door that I had to do something. I had to let you know about the horrible mistake you made, the injustice, that you didn't care about people of color and that you didn't care about cities like Maple Heights. You referenced in your comments East Cleveland, and East Cleveland gets referenced a lot. But what people forget to say is when East Cleveland's referenced, so is Maple Heights. And I'm here late today because I was on a Power Future Clean Air Sustainability Tour. And I got to stop at, I forget the name of it, but it was an old car dealership. Dennis Roberts did the presentation on what they're planning to do in Maple Heights. I mean, in East Cleveland. But you've done that in Maple Heights. 2 weeks ago, Keith Faber, the auditor of the state, came to the city of Maple Heights at our council meeting to present us with a Clean Audit Award. This is 2 years out of getting out of fiscal emergency, which is a 5-year recovery. Some cities have been in for 20, 30 years. We had 5, I did it in 4, a little bit of an overachiever. But the reason Keith Faber drove to Maple Heights, and he was an hour late coming from Columbus, because it is unheard of that a city that only 2 years out of fiscal emergency would get a Clean Audit Award. City of Maple Heights is in the top 10% of clean audits out of 6,000 cities. It started with my relationship with you. And you didn't get credit for that because nobody asked me. And so for the cities that were represented that do not look like me and that missed opportunity, and you know what I'm saying, When I came to your office and I just saw Merriman stick his head in and out because they were gonna take his head off, he didn't know what to do. Because when he came to Maple Heights, they threatened him because he had done something horrible. Where would people go to access benefits? Food stamps and child support, which had been at Southgate. And Southgate had lost a huge tenant. A lot of your workers at that center lived in Maple Heights and walked to work. I know that transportation's a problem. You and I sit on the NOACA board. How are they gonna access it? And so the way you and I solved it, I said, I want a meeting with him. I don't want an email. I don't wanna talk to Merriman. I don't want a phone call. I wanna talk to this man. And I came down. Now there were 6 men in that room. And there was a Diet Coke sitting at the table. I'd never seen you. I assumed that the person walking in the room would be drinking Diet Coke, and this little guy comes in. It was you.
Little guy.
Yeah, big in personality and stature.
I was expecting this big person, the county exec, And you smiled and you leaned to me, and you said, it's in universal pre-K, and I don't know what you want me to do. And I says, what you cannot do is send me back to Maple Heights empty-handed. I can tell you what you cannot do, and this don't send me back empty-handed. And you said, I will not send you back empty-handed. Tell me what I can do to do my best to make this right. We're not gonna go into the details of what that was. But since that day, 7 years later, you have done that and more. The reason we were able to receive that award and get out of fiscal emergency is I was able to relieve the burden on my general fund. Because Department of Public Works and grants and all the things that are not in that report came to Maple Heights, and I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, let me just add to that, because, when we do something, it always has an impact. Sometimes good, we hope, and sometimes not good. As you said, one of the first things we had to do was close an office in Maple Heights, and that was jobs, and that was access to supports, and I felt horrible about it. And I knew that there was the protests, they were gonna be coming, and so Mayor Blackwell comes in to talk to me, and unlike many times that people come in to talk to me when they're not happy about something, they yell and they scream and they, lay as much of a guilt trip as they can. Mayor Blackwell came in very positive. She comes in, she's a positive person. She said, okay, you're doing this, I understand, and I will do my best to let people know that this had to be done and that the county's not coming after us in any bad way. She said, but I need some things, we're in trouble here. And I told Mayor Black, she was great. I mean, I wish everybody who I dealt with handled things as professionally and well as you did. And you don't have to come in and see me and yell and scream to get what you want. She came in and we talked, and I told her I would do everything I can, and you correct me if I'm not telling the truth, everything I can from this point forward to help Maple Heights. And I think I did. I mean, I certainly made my best efforts, and you, of course, did very well. I mean, it's easy to help somebody as good as you. So, when you're providing services and benefits and grants and other things to somebody who's going to handle them well, it makes it a lot easier. And Mayor Blackwell is one of the best mayors I've gotten to know, and
Expect that, but thank you.
and you really have done a great job. And so it was very easy for me to try to be helpful. And I probably have done as much or more for Maple as I've done for others, but I will tell you that we try not to, probably the biggest thing we did, you mentioned East Cleveland. I was meeting with Anthony Hairston, who's now a city councilman in Cleveland. He was a county councilman and represented a number of East Side cities. And he came to see me and also was very professional, as Mayor Blackwell was, and said, we need your help. said, what can the county do? And he said, we've got the worst environmental hazard maybe in the country, certainly in the Midwest. It's called ARCO. And I didn't know squat about it before he came in to see me. Let me just tell you, it was a mountain of garbage hazards in a residential neighborhood in East Cleveland. It was terrible. When I went out there to see it, I couldn't believe my eyes. And when we started figuring out what it would cost to fix that, to cart away all that garbage, it was millions and millions and millions of dollars. I mean, this was not send out some of your employees and, with little buckets and pails and clean it up. I was hoping it was going to be. This was a multi-million-dollar project. And we were in financial difficulties ourselves in the county, but working with the state EPA, we were able to convince them and work with them to clean that up. And we got it cleaned up in, I don't know, not a terrible amount of time. And it is now gone. But that was one of the best things we've done. And we've tried to do that sort of work, different things for different communities for the entire 8 years that I've been in office. So Mayor Blackwell, you've been great to work with, and I appreciate it.
No protest came, did it?
No protest. No,
Just end on that.
it was just the way things should work. You came in, you were very level-headed, you told me what you needed, and I tried to respond.
Thank you.
Carter, we've gotten through the executive's comments, and now we're playing nice with him.
My apologies for my.
It's quite all right.
For those of you, by the way, who didn't get to hear Sandra Williams' comments, I appreciate your mentioning those. She was the head of the Legislative Black Caucus when I was the speaker. And so we worked together every day. There's nobody I worked with closer than Sandra. And I mean, we became close personal friends, but also close working colleagues. And so she told a couple stories. I'll just tell one. We had the state was working on casino legislation, making them legal around the state. They were going to make legal 4 casinos in Ohio. And Sandra came to me on behalf of the Black Caucus and said, we want to make sure that there's minority employees, construction and others. And we want some guarantees that that's going to happen. And so we went to it was Dan Gilbert and I forget who the other one was. Penn, yeah. And we told them what we wanted. And we told, we didn't control everything. I was the Speaker of the House. The Senate was controlled by the Republicans. And we had Ted Strickland as the governor. And Ted had a lot of his own issues that he had to deal with in the state. So I went to everybody and said, this is what we need. We need, I forget what it was, 25% guarantees for minority contractors. And they said initially no. Even my own caucus and the Democrats in the House were giving me a hard time about it because everybody wanted to get this done. And we had a finite time period that we were leaving for break. And if this didn't pass, it wasn't going to go. So it was like midnight on the day we were debating this. And it was not going anywhere. And I said, we're staying until we work this out, period. And 1 o'clock came, 2 o'clock came, 3 o'clock. It was the old joke about, you cover up the clock so, you can't see when your time's up. And we finally got it through, just as the Black Caucus wanted. And we did make sure that there were enough jobs for everybody. So it worked out very well. That was the story she told. She gets a lot of the credit there, just like Mayor Blackwell gets his credit for Maple Heights.
Very good. Any other comments? It was similar to your work with the Legislative Black Caucus. You may not remember, but early in your tenure as House Speaker, the President's Council, an organization in town, Black business owners, we came to see you. And we were on our, I don't guess, Mid-Ohio tour. And you were, and I didn't know you then, but a few others did. I may have been chair of the organization at the time, but you were just as gracious without knowing that organization, but listened. And well, I don't know if we came away with anything, so we didn't know what to ask for.
Should have worked with Mayor Blackwell.
Right.
She knew exactly what
We just, we weren't talented enough. But you were really, and I mean it, truly gracious in that, with your time and in that conversation. Again, maybe stories, she entertained so many folks that you don't remember, but I do vividly from that era. All right.
I just want to say, and I'll be very brief because time is not our friend as we move on along with other things to talk about. But I just want to thank you, Armin, for being an effective leader who, through good times and bad times, always held your head up and tried to do what you thought was right. And that's not always easy. And I hope that as you look back on your career, you'll realize that a lot of the seeds that you planted have actually bloomed and have made the county better and will continue to make the county better for many years to come. You always were a person I could call and get on the phone, or that would actually sit down and talk. And you and your wife were always curious about how initiatives were going, and just excited to see progress in the city. And I always felt that was genuine, or the county for that matter. So just want to wish you well, and hope that you take a lot of pride in all the sacrifices that you've made personally to step up and be an elected official in a tough town and a tough county. I think you'll leave smiling just like you are now, knowing that you did the best you could do. So that's all any of us can ask.
I appreciate that too, and I'm smiling because I'm thinking back to some of our interactions. I think it might have been my wife that introduced us or got us together initially, and as she did with many people. We went out to Ridall, and you were gracious enough to give us a personal tour. Again, I was flabbergasted. I mean, you took an area that, was forgotten and turned it into a functioning, profitable business. Not profitable for you, but profitable for the community. For those of you who haven't been out to see Ridall, you should definitely take a half a day out to go through it. And you've improved it even. I mean, now you have food and everything. It's a really wonderful place. In fact, if you have an event, you can have an event out there.
And we have a farmer's market in Maple Heights. Once again, her negotiation skills.
She's good. What you've done in the community is, that's just one small part of what you do. But, it makes it easy for somebody like me when, we have people like you that are doing so much good. And when it came time to figure out what to do with all those empty lots that are scarring every place in Cuyahoga County, one of the first things I thought of was maybe you can be helpful, and put you with Sarah Continenza from Food Strong and Food Strong, and I think it's, we got to start, and I think it's going to be really productive, and maybe a couple years from now there won't be all those scars all over the county. It'll be all gardens and places to raise food and get community involved, bring community together. It's really wonderful. So thank you for that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Eddie.
absolutely. All right. In terms of an update from me, the only thing I'll add is we have this bit of funding from the general operating. We have not yet sat down as a group, at least the subcommittee co-chairs will start there, to talk about some of the ways in which we should make best use of these funds. So we will do that, which is sometime in December, perhaps virtually, which is perhaps why this will be the last meeting for in a formal way between now and the start of next year. But I would also say this, none of this should be done in a vacuum. We just want to have a productive conversation. So yes, the subcommittee co-chairs, but if there are those who want to join, raise your hand away from this setting, and we will find a way to get as many voices involved so we can do the right kinds of projects to make the best use of these funds for purposes of equity in this county. All right, so that's all I'll add there. We have a quorum now, so.
We do, so,
Please.
we have minutes we need to approve, and according to our legal counsel, we have to approve each one separately. So if you may recall, the minutes from the April 11th CASE meeting were distributed on April 20th, 2022 for review. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Chalker. Is there a second? Thank you, Del McShepherd, for seconding. Any discussion about those minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. The minutes are approved. The second set of minutes is from our July 19th CASE meeting, and those were distributed on July 27th for your review. Can I have a motion to approve that set of minutes, please?
Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Schumate. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Blackwell. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries and those minutes are accepted. Lastly, the minutes from our last meeting, which was on September 12th, were distributed for your review on September 30th. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. McShepherd. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Reverend Chalker. Is there any discussion on those minutes? Hearing none, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries and those minutes are approved.
Okay, so Director Merriman is, oh, you're gonna give, okay, all right, thank you. Sabrina, Ms. Roberts, she's gonna go get it?
Yes, she's
All right,
right.
all
He's right next door.
Okay.
It's right up there.
He's
Oh,
right
well,
there.
he is now in the room. Okay, so Elvis has entered. Oh, wow.
Holy smokes, would you bring the whole debate? This group is tough, but you didn't have to bring all
So,
of us.
today, welcome, HHS partners. Today, we're excited to welcome our Health and Human Services Department Director, David Merriman, who most, if not all of you know, and members of his senior leadership team. I believe with him, and we all know and welcome her, my friend, Ms. Sabrina Roberts, welcome, and others. Jacqueline Fletcher, I believe, is here, correct? That's right. Kevin Gowan, Shauna Roman, and Marcos Cortez are all here, and it seems like there may in fact be others that I've neglected to add. So I believe they're just going to introduce themselves and very briefly share what they do on behalf of the county. Is that correct, David?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right. Was there a PowerPoint, a brief PowerPoint? Oh,
It
there
is up and it has
There
been
we go.
distributed in hard copy.
And I also have a cheat sheet I'll pass around that has a little more information, as well as contact information for everyone that's here, as well as those staff that are unavailable today. First, good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. For the record, my name is David Merriman. I'm the Director of Health and Human Services. I'm joined by Sabrina Roberts, who's my interim director. Several of my team members were not available today, so I'll be representing them in our presentation. But Sabrina and I are gonna kick this off by just first setting some context. DHHS is the largest single department in the county. We serve approximately 400,000 to 500,000 residents every single year. I'd argue the only organization that's bigger than us is maybe taxation in its ability to touch every county resident. Outside of that, I'm not sure there's a larger government organization in the county. We're probably close to 60% of the executive staff And on every single day, every single hour, there's a health and human service worker serving someone in Cogga County. Literally, every single day, every single hour, someone from DHHS is serving this community. So if I can ask to advance, great. So normally, what we're presenting our services as, there are the core safety net services. We'll talk about those 4 in a second, and then we have a number of community initiatives. There are also several departments that are shared service offices that provide administrative functions. And I'm going to ask Marcos if you'll switch out with us for a second with Sabrina, just to ask Sabrina to introduce Sabrina and to let her share a little bit about the role of the assistant director and the offices that report to her. What I'd like to commit to is each of us are going to take no more than 2 minutes. We want this to be more of a discussion. I think we could spend 2 hours just talking about health and human services, and it would just be the first 2 inches of our services. So I hope that this presentation today is more of an introduction and opening of the conversation, and that we're given the opportunity as time moves on, either have individual directors come in and speak to specific issues, or for any of you to ever reach out to any of us with any specific concerns. So let me introduce Sabrina Roberts. Many of you know Sabrina. She's been with the county for, I think, 29 plus years, serving in a number of roles. She is the interim assistant director of Health and Human Services. I just ask Sabrina to introduce herself and share anything she'd like to share.
First of all, good morning, Chair Taylor and the rest of the committee. It's wonderful to be here. I often watch these online, so it's nice to be in person.
That makes 2 of you.
Usually, that is true. Usually I'm one of only a couple people, but nonetheless, maybe people are just busy and they go back and watch it. The views, it's all about the views. So, as David said, I've been here 28 and a half years, and in my time here, I've had a span across work here from finance, frontline when I first started at what is now JFS, but it wasn't called JFS back then. And I'll tell you, there is no more dedicated folks than people at HHS. We are the front-facing, touching people, dealing with crisis, planning for the future all at once. So the people sitting right behind me, they are just extremely talented and do a yeoman's job every day. So I just wanted to say that. So in my role, for baseball fans, I pinch hit a lot for David. There's a myriad amount of meetings that he's called to. Everything from workforce, working with the executive council, and then we have these 8 departments, right? So he is pulled in a lot of directions, so I pinch hit for him a lot of times in meetings. We do everything from day-to-day crisis management to policy across the board, how we advocate for things for our staff internally, how we advocate for our citizens and our residents interfacing with all of our different systems. So specifically, I'm kind of a dual role right now with Administrative Health Policy and Programs. So I'm an inside-outside person here for DHHS. I sit on a lot of committees externally around efforts to create opportunity for people, whether it's First Year Cleveland Advisory Board and infant mortality, whether it's working with folks like MedWorks and those folks around health access for our diverse populations that may be under or not insured. And I have launched many projects throughout the county in the jail connection to Medicaid, working with Kevin Gowan, setting up something at 211 called MedRefer, where it's a discount drugs, and also patient assistance programs that anybody in the county can take advantage of. So strategic planning, finance, all of it is my background. Who reports to me, other than pinch hitting for David, learning and professional development. We onboard all new staff here and do continual trainings for staff. And that's around 25 folks. I have about 100 folks who report up to me through 2 administrators. And then we have client support services. That's the customer resolution team where people are calling in with issues that need to be resolved. We have our investigation team for fraud, and then child care licensing in the in-home. So I can probably talk for another 2 minutes, but I think I'm over 2 minutes. So it was a pleasure. Thank you, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Sabrina.
we will do round robin, and then at the end, as soon as we just want to use the balance of our time for questions. So I'm going to ask Jackie Fletcher to join. And I do want to acknowledge that Natasha Petricola has a senior advisory board meeting at the same time. Natasha's not here, so I'll be speaking on her behalf. But let me introduce Jackie Fletcher. Jackie's the interim director of the Division of Children and Family Services. And she has stepped into what I think of as possibly the hardest role in Cuyahoga County. It's a toss-up between her and the sheriff, in my opinion. I think she wins, and I think she stepped in at one of the hardest times that has ever been sort of in our experience. So Jackie, if I could ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about DCFS.
Again, Jackie Fletcher, interim director. Thank you for inviting us over. This is always good to get out of Janet Hunter. So thank you. I always start with child protection it's a community-wide effort. It's bigger than any one agency or any one person. But our child welfare system, as we know it, and you guys have heard a lot about DCFS and what we do, but I'll just say, the biggest component is keeping kids safe. And recently, we've been adding, of course, keeping kids safe, keeping our staff safe, keeping the community safe is also paramount to everything that we do in our umbrella. So we have over 800 staff that we're budgeted for under the DCFS umbrella. That's a lot, right? We do have some vacancies, but we're working through that. I will say currently we have a little under 2,300 kids in care at this moment. Nearly a third of those kids are placed with relatives. And that's really a primary goal for us, is when we can do so, keeping kids safe with their families, right? Reduces the trauma, keeps kids safely in their communities, connected with their school systems, their friends. That's one of our critical mission-driven initiatives, is keeping kids with their families. We've begun paying relatives, so that's really important to stabilizing that family base. So that's a really big key component. And I would say keeping kids, if we have to take custody, keeping them in this community. As you all may have heard, we're dealing with a significant placement crisis, not just here in Cuyahoga County, but across the country. And so another thing that we're working through is just really trying to identify those critical placement options, particularly with our kids who have suffered some of the most severe trauma that you can ever imagine. So keeping those kids safe, close to home, is something that we continue to strive for. So that's DCFS.
All right, I'm going to present on DSAS, and then we will be saving time for questions. And I'll ask Kevin to get up in the batter's box here, or the on deck spot. So the Division of Senior and Adult Services is led by Natasha Petricola. She's also an interim director. DSAS covers everything from adult protective services, where social workers go into homes to investigate alleged incidents of elder abuse and neglect. It's an emerging field, as there's much more financial crimes being committed against elder residents. So this is something that's significant and growing. They also do a variety of health services, in-home direct health services with county residents. They have an options programs that provides another level of assistance, home care, and some other valuable resources that they'll go into residents' home and provide. They partner with a number of communities. I believe Maple Heights is one of their community centers where they provide funding to offer senior meals, either congregate where seniors come to them, or at times where they take food to seniors. They also offer transportation. And then they have a number of case management services that they offer to seniors as well as adults with disabilities. There's a wide range of programs that they offer. Again, they're one of the groups that absolutely merit much more time and discussion. Let me introduce Kevin Gowan. Kevin has been with the county in a number of roles. He is the administrator of public assistance and job and family services. Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about JFS?
Certainly. Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody, for inviting us, specifically me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to just give you a brief overview of what Job and Family Services does. Job and Family Services is the human service agency that's charged with addressing people who are facing poverty, who are facing great needs in the community. We do that really by administering federal programs. So most of what you hear when you talk about Job and Family Services, those are federally funded programs. You see them displayed on the screen up there. SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, if you're not sure of the acronym, it was formerly known as food stamps. Medicaid, for medical assistance in all areas. Cash assistance, which is a smaller program for us, it's there. Child care, and we have workforce development supports. Those are largely tied to the other programs. So as people, we talk about workforce with public assistance, it's people who are involved in the SNAP program and the cash program. We serve a great number of people, and that the number of people that we serve, especially through Medicaid, has increased significantly during the pandemic. So prior to the pandemic, 380,000 people in Cuyahoga County, roughly a quarter of the population, was on Medicaid. That number has now climbed to 450,000. So more than a third of Cuyahoga County is now receiving Medicaid services. There are reasons for that, which we might come back at some point and probably get into. It has a lot to do with rules that came out around the pandemic. There are 210,000 people currently receiving SNAP or food assistance in Cuyahoga County, still a sizable population. By far, those are our two biggest programs. Child care is around 18,000. That has shrunk during the pandemic. And that's largely because child care has changed significantly. I'm not going to step on Shauna's toes. She's here to talk about child care, but that's changed significantly during the pandemic. And so we have roughly 600 employees who address these needs and administer these benefits. We have multiple ways in which people can apply for benefits. There's an online service portal that's maintained by the state. We partner with the local county and city of Cleveland library systems. We have sisters who work there who help people apply for benefits and can also help people get documents to us. We receive, over our contact center, we receive applications and do casework over our contact center. And we have our Virgil Brown building is our main building where we see the public right now. And people can always use our Dropboxes at various neighborhood family service centers to drop off applications and documentation. And we're going to have a lot going on. During the pandemic, we were under some more relaxed rules for both us and the clients, so it was a little easier to do things. Those rules are being rolled back. They have already been rolled back, largely for the SNAP program. And there's going to be another rollback in most likely January of next year on the Medicaid program. And that's going to start to shrink again. And that's really in response to the pandemic and changing rules.
Sounds good.
So, thank you.
I'll invite Tiffany Dobbins-Brazelton to speak on the Office of Child Support Services and the services that they're offering to the families of our county.
All right, good afternoon. Again, thank you for having us. I am Tiffany Dobbins-Brazelton, as David said, and for the Office of Child Support Services, we are responsible for establishing both paternity establishment as well as child support orders, the maintenance of those orders, and collections of child support. And I do want to say we have worked for several years now to rebrand the child support program and not just make it about punitive activities, but how we can be of health and human service benefit to the community. So we do work with different populations, such as including our sister agencies through homeless population. I'm proud to say we are a participant of a recent grant, SAVES grant, which is Safe Access for Victims' Economic Security. And so we are working on how individuals can safely receive child support, as well as looking to remove barriers for individuals who pay child support. How can we assist in that? So we do a lot of work with that, the homeless population, incarcerated, reentry individuals. And so just trying to remove the stigma that, we're only there for punitive and bad things. So I wanted to bring that out. We serve right now over 137,000 children within Cuyahoga County and their parents. And so in a nutshell, that is child support.
Great.
How many employees? I'm sorry.
How many employees?
How many employees? 315.
Tia, can you advance the slide?
I'm not
Oh,
the slide.
who's got the slide? Oh, Ricky, sorry. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Robin Martin was unavailable today, so I'm going to ask Shauna to come forward as we prep for her. Robin Martin serves as the director of the Family and Children First Council. They provide youth development services. In essence, you're gonna see a break in services. They are older than 6, up to 18. Shauna and her team serves 6 and younger. And FCFC, as they're commonly known in the community, provides a range of preventive services, after-school programming. They provide some special youth development leadership opportunities. They also offer many multi-system youth direct services where they engage the different public systems to make sure our public systems are working together on families that are involved with child support or with DCFS and the juvenile court. This is absolutely an emerging program in that there is more and more resources coming to our community for alignment and coordination of those services. So I think Robin would be happy to come in the future, but I want to introduce Shauna Rohrman. Shauna is the interim director of Invest in Children. Shauna can tell us a little bit about Invest in Children or the Office of Early Childhood.
Yes, thank you to you all for having us here. So Invest in Children is a public-private partnership for the early childhood system in Cuyahoga County. We are staffed through the Office of Early Childhood. And so our team does work in 4 key areas, all through a lead agency model. So we partner with lead agencies who provide direct services in the community. The first area of work that we do is around child and family services and support. A lot of that is home-based or home visiting services, which, as you might imagine, had to do a quick pivot during the pandemic to virtual services. So that model has really changed, and we saw really quick adaptation and a lot of resilience, not just in the staff who do those programs, but also the families receiving services. The second area of our work is supporting children with special needs, and that is a wide range. Primarily what we see is behavioral health challenges, but also needs that, physical conditions that require special equipment, things like that. Those services take place both in the home and in the classroom. One of the challenges we're seeing in that area of work is a real workforce challenge. This is a theme you'll hear from me. And so we have a greater need coming during and coming out of the pandemic for these types of services, and we're seeing unfortunately a shrinking workforce, which means that we have children waiting for services. So that's a critical area for us. The third area of our work, and probably the biggest area of our work, is in enhancing the quality of childcare and early childhood education. So that involves both working to enhance the quality of the system. It involves professional development for childcare professionals, as well as our universal pre-kindergarten program, which provides scholarships and quality enhancement to increase access and even more increased quality in childcare centers. This area is also one where we're seeing huge workforce challenges, losing childcare staff and professionals and experts who work very hard, losing them to your Amazon and your Target and your Starbucks who are able to pay more. So that's a challenge that we're facing now. The fourth area of our work is special projects. So we've got a really exciting new project called Family Space. It's a partnership with United Way and the library system. And we also fund the Child Fatality Review at the Board of Health.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Marcos to come forward as a representative of one of our shared services. I do want to briefly speak on homeless services and reentry. The Office of Homeless Services is led by Melissa Sirak, and they are charged with carrying out both the county as well as the city's strategic plans and initiatives to address homelessness, to reduce chronic homelessness, and to also support prevention of homelessness. Most significant projects that they're working on right now is the county executive recently enabled us to purchase the building next to 2100. That's the men's shelter. That building will enable us to deconcentrate the shelter. We'll go from large rooms with bunk beds to small cubicles with more individualized space. This is a real significant enhancement of our service system. 2100 will break ground on this on their new building in the next month. And this will transform our ability to manage homelessness, also prepare for things like pandemics and other natural disasters. It won't change the amount of homeless beds that are available. It will change the way that we treat people that are homeless, largely with more dignity. The women's shelter, which is managed, the men's shelter is managed by Lutheran Metro Ministry. The women's shelter is managed by the YWCA. Similarly, they've purchased the building behind them. They're going to deconcentrate that space. In fact, those rooms will be even better. I believe most will have their own bathrooms. And I think the direction that we're going with homelessness is to provide a better environment, a more stable situation for our residents to become stable and ultimately leave homelessness. There is a wide variety of prevention programs they're doing. The most significant is they recently received a grant, a $4 million grant to prevent youth homelessness. And so you're going to see and hear a lot more about homeless services over the next month and into next year. Lastly, the Office of Reentry is led by Simeon Best. Simeon, too, just recently got a $1 million grant to begin do much more performance-based contracting, helping residents returning to our community get jobs. It'll be a new initiative out of their office that will lead how we help immediately returning citizens find employment. Aside from that, they offer services that range from legal clinics to help for expungement, advocacy. They do case management, and they fund the operation of North Star, which is our one-stop shop for returning citizens. There are other programs that they do, but I'll leave it there. The last thing I want to say before I open it up to questions, so these 8 programs represent our core services. In addition to them, we have other administrative offices. We have a fiscal office, a communications office, a performance evaluation innovation office, and then we have an office that's called DCAP, or Contract Administration and Performance. In this model, what we do is we share services across all programs, and in doing that, we enable our administrative team to flow between the different projects as they hit periods where there are higher priorities or there's higher workload. One example of that is DCAP. Marcos, can you introduce yourself and how DCAP works?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you again for having us here. Again, my name is Marcos Cortez. I'm the administrator for the Division of Contracts, Administration, and Performance. Yes, it's a mouthful. That's why we say DCAP. You've heard all of the great work that my colleagues have talked about and all of the great things that they're doing. Well, DCAP makes that possible. Partly, we process over 300 contracts annually with 130 different vendors for health and human services. We solicit these services through our formal process, through RFPs, and then through our informal bids. We create those contracts, we monitor some of those contracts for compliance, and we review invoices as well for payment processing. So our goal is to support the various health and human services divisions to meet their procurement needs in a timely and efficient manner. We work with our county departments at the Department of Purchasing and the legal department to make sure all of our contracts are in place, on time, cost-effective, and meeting the needs of our citizens in Cuyahoga County.
Thanks, Marcos. The other shared services I neglected to mention were described by Sabrina Roberts. That includes our training office, our customer care, our customer support unit, as well as our investigations. So that concludes our presentation. As I said, I wanted to go just a couple inches into what is otherwise a very complicated system. Several of our staff do have to leave for 3 o'clock, so they'll have to leave at 3. But I thought it best just to summarize by saying that we are your social service office. We are the largest and the most significant office that provides social services in Cuyahoga County and probably the state of Ohio. We are largely funded by your tax levy dollars, your health and human service levy dollars. I can say there's a resident on every street in Cuyahoga County that's getting a service from us in one form or another. We're here to serve. We're here to serve them, but we're also here to serve you. We're very open to hearing any questions or any comments.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Job well done, and appreciate you truncating, I know, which would be otherwise lengthy remarks. So thank you very much. Questions, comments from folks, observations, because we asked for this, right? We wanted to hear the breadth of health and human services. You've been with us for a while, but we had no idea, at least I didn't, the immensity of it, and also the variety of things, because some of these on the surface seem like they could be in one area, but then I hear the conversation from young to 6 years old and 6 to 18, there must be a reason for that bifurcation, for that line to be drawn. And we hear other services being offered to children, again, reasons why child protection is separate from some of the other child-related activities. So that's been worthwhile to hear.
Yeah,
Please.
following up on that, the thing that stood out for me, thank you all for being here, by the way, and thank you Sabrina Roberts for getting me through grad school. I'm curious, you think about the fact that, we're the #1 city in America for childhood poverty. And, as our chairman said, there's a lot of programs that, as I looked at them, I kind of thought, well, families are comprised of seniors and children, and so then I hear about all these different departments. So to what extent do you all sort of triage, the folks that you serve? How often do you get a chance to sort of compare notes and to see where those lines are drawn or could be lessened or whatever the case may be? It just seems, it's a huge operation. And I remember talking to you before, a year plus ago, and I remember then walking away just dizzy about, But how do you handle that?
Sure. So every one of our programs has some focus on childhood poverty in some form or another. The direct answer is this is largely a function of Job and Family Services that provides public assistance to children, families, seniors, and disabled individuals, and child support, which is helping families work together on parenting. But it absolutely is present within senior services. As you mentioned, a lot of families raise their children outside of a mother and child, or parents and child. It's present in reentry as we look to restore many citizens. Clearly is present in the Office of Early Childhood, which is first focusing on the prenatal period and helping families to form and having safe, healthy pregnancies. And then to address early intervention and have the quality education they need to succeed in life. It's present in Family and Children First Council, where they then provide wraparound services to younger kids to move all the way through. And then it continues in homeless services as we see people hit many times the lowest point in their life, and we try to lift them up. So the answer is, in every one of our programs, the criticism is, it generally is specific to that program, to the rules and federal policies that are handed to it. We work within what is called a state-supervised, locally administered system. The federal government gives money to the state gives it to each county. Each county is told what to do and how to do it, and has a little bit of room for variation. And unfortunately, our programs don't work enough together, and all too frequently work against each other. And I think so the challenge for us, and what we've been talking about, is how do we have a more integrated, a more interoperability philosophy that says our rules are our problem. They should not be the problem of our families. Our families have to navigate us instead of having us present the roadmap to them. And that's, I think, the challenge moving forward. And I think we're up for it. This was a goal of ours over the past 2 years. I just acknowledge we focused on COVID instead. But I don't think we have that anymore. I think we have to recover to the point of having a real serious commitment to use administrative data, to use best practice, and to come up with models that really work for families. I don't know if you had anything?
And I would say one thing, through the chair to Mr. McShepard.
We don't do that here.
Okay, just making sure, okay, Randy. As you said, so these rules are coming down. Everyone has rules. We in the background, we meet every couple weeks as a team and talk about our different systems. But beyond that, that's where groups like this and with the executive's office, lobbyists, can come together and say, here's where we're hitting the wall on some of these things. It's out of our control. Here's where we need to do a better job leaning in with groups like this to say, legally, we can't do this. And oftentimes, I think in media, the story is slanted, but they don't understand we can't do it by law. So we probably can do a better job going forward of unpacking what is legally our responsibility and what we can and can't do. When we know what the answer is, we just can't do it.
I was just commenting to Kevin Gowan, at a future date, it makes sense for you to hear about the unwinding at the state level. As Kevin referenced, there are a number of policies that were put in place during COVID that made our processes more resident-focused, that had a customer service element. There are times that we could waive certain requirements that now Now we have to get back to, and we actually have to carry out those requirements. And so, but it's very complicated and it gets into details. It probably isn't the right presentation for this, but Kevin's willing to come back at a future time and talk about that unwinding, talk about how policy plays out for those families, but also for our workers, because we actually have to carry out at times some pretty difficult policies.
So, two questions, but certainly a comment initially of appreciation for the work you do and the professional way in which you provide services to those in need. You know, as a citizen, I'm aware of Health and Human Services being a big component of the county's services and effort. But to hear in the 10, 12 minutes that you gave us the overview, I mean, it's a lot, right? And day in and day out to service the needs and burdens, if you will, I just want to say thank you for that. And it seems like each of you are very both humbled and yet professional in that approach. And so just I applaud that and want to say thanks for that. My two questions, you know, and one is around the span of service you provide to seniors, those on Medicaid, and then kind of the pre-K or childhood, you know, even early childhood and infancy programs. Like, is there a sense of, you know, where, I mean, I heard, I don't know, 300,000 on Medicaid and 18, you know, thousand in another area. I mean, just trying to understand like where services, and may not have the right answer to that, because it's a complex variation, but just curious out of personal curiosity more than anything. But the other question, and I think it's one that I've asked from a CACE perspective with the underline of community and equity, right, our committee, how can we be more supportive? How can we help?
So let me answer the question about just scale and where our services are. I'll ask Sabrina to talk a little bit about equity because she's led up DHHS's equity work. She's been the leader of that work and in the past with one of my colleagues, Leon Harris, but she's been the consistent factor on it. But so briefly we'll speak on that. As to our scale, I would say the vast majority of our clients are children, our seniors, are disabled adults. That's well over 60%. Most of the people we serve are children, seniors, or disabled adults, and quite a few of them are veterans as well. And those populations are disadvantaged, and frequently they are not well served by other systems. And by that I mean there are not enough services for seniors in our state and in our country. And we then step into that role. I think there is not a really strong early childhood education program in this country. We step into that role. And I think for disabled adults, whether it be a cognitive disability or mental illness, all too frequently they fall between the cracks of the programs, and our job is to help connect them to the various systems. So we're principally serving those individuals. The other large group is the working poor. When Kevin described his services, SNAP and Medicaid and child support, those are work support strategies. They help working men, women, and families get jobs, stay in jobs, and advance from those jobs. So an increasing role for us is to provide work support strategies to the working poor of our community. I don't know if you'd add anything on equity?
Well, I have a lot to say about equity, but so, Mr. Shumate, so inside, outside approach. So for HHS, a little bit different approach. We started off with, because of the Equity Commission internally, our inside approach. Been doing this work for a while and really on a journey with it, because it's a journey. What I would say about our approach now, we need to expand it a little more to really deepen our work internally. We can clean up the data. We can dust off some of the processes, but you have to make sure the internal is well. You have to make sure they're prepared to do that deep work. In order to do that deep work, we have to really look at ourselves, and we've begun this process to say, are we in a place that we can really look on the outside to do this well. Yes, we can start, but our whole impetus around the Equity Commission was to say, how are we doing? How do we look? We want to be leaders in this, but we have to be okay inside with equitable treatment of staff, and that can take on various things. I see Director Sheba is in the room, Marshall, and all the things that go with HR, opportunities for promotion, opportunities for equitable pay. All of those things matter to begin to have a foundation of a morale in your departments. That translates to really good service. So just as much as we're looking externally, we have to look internally too at how equity looks. And I think equity begins to be more about practitioner. What is the practice? And of course, you have to have awareness in the beginning, but the real, you take out the scalpel and you start looking at practice as a spoke in the wheel. It's not easy because this is a system, right? It's built on inequity. So we have to take each department and we have to unpack each department. How do your forms look? Who do they speak to? Do they include the father? When you're talking about immigrants or refugees, how do we welcome folks? So there's so much unpacking that needs to happen. And in order to unpack that, you have to have the tools to understand what to look for. So the DEI approach, we're learning, but we have to move to a place where we can practice it, not just learn about it. And that takes some deep work. So I can talk a long time about it, but in our departments, I'm working with each director to not necessarily go fast. See, we can do a lot of assignments, but it's in the practice. It's in learning, okay, look for this. How do you begin to train very specifically to that department's needs? So that's what we look to do going forward.
Thank you.
I hope I answered.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's, and I don't want to take any time, and certainly we can have a follow-up, but it is from our lens of what we are charged to do as a council on equity, how we can support work you do, right? That's really another part of, for another conversation perhaps. But
Well,
thank you for
support
the
it
internal work.
and talk about
That
it,
makes
right?
sense,
Because
sure.
part of what we're gonna spend time doing in December is working through the community reporting, right? We want facts, we want details, we want accomplishments. We also wanna know and hear where concerns exist. So the reporting, you don't have to tell on yourselves necessarily, but it's important that we're candid with one another. So the community obligation we have is to talk about how the county is doing on all of these different axes that we're talking about. Please.
Well, thanks, and my question is a good follow-up to yours. So I was struck with a very short synopsis from each of you about these complicated systems. 2 or 3 of you mentioned shortage in workforce. So I want to dig a little bit deeper in that, and it clearly relates to equity and the issues that you were just talking about in terms of how does it relate to workforce shortages? How bad is it in this department? How much do we think it relates to things like upward opportunity, advancement opportunities, and pay, both with relation to staff and contracting, like the childcare issues that Invest in Children mentioned that. Shauna mentioned in terms of childcare, which is probably not county employees, but contracting. And then also in terms of, as you noted, services are clearly impacted in terms of processing food stamps and processing and providing child. So that was a big question, but but again, I was really struck that in such a short period of time, that came up several times. So.
I would agree they're complicated. I would actually say they're complex because each of these systems is interrelated. Although we do live within our silos, there are constant connections between the systems, which make it even harder at times for you to navigate and track. So the issue about workforce, I asked Jackie to come forward because last month, county executive and county council signed and gave us the authorization to begin hiring social service worker threes at $26 an hour. And that's just the entry wage for a social worker three. And I'll ask Jackie to speak a little bit about sort of how that's played out in terms of recent hiring events, which we do in partnership with HR and the Personnel Review Commission. But I want to say this. We went from paying an entry-level worker $20.70 an hour to $26. What Armin said and council signed off on is come in higher than your neighbors. Start to attract people from around this community. Because if we don't have social workers, we have unreasonable caseloads, we have the inability to provide the quality of service that we need to provide. And at the end of the day, we're not serving children the way that we need to. And that decision, and it just wasn't social workers, and it just wasn't 26 an hour, which by the way, only one county had a little bit higher. They were $26.50 when they required a master's degree, which we don't. It was also that you moved those progressions in 5 years instead of 9, but you got your steps and your increases over 5 years. So you got to the top of your wage after 5 years, and there was a similar increase for the aide positions that did not require a degree, and a similar increase for the therapist positions, which required a master's degree. And I would say in doing this, Armin planted a stake in the ground that said, we will pay our employees well. This really speaks to the point Sabrina was making, that if we don't care for our employees, we will not provide good services. We must care for our services. I will also say we put that stake in the ground for all of human services. If human services does not pay as well as the jail, then we will lose our best employees to the jail. I support fully, we cannot lose our employees to them. I'm gonna ask Jackie, before we did the increase, roughly how many vacancies did we have? Can you talk a little bit about recent hiring events and also any feedback you're getting on the raises?
So I'll frame this initially with saying, that's a great question. Last year alone, you know, our hotline is 24/7, right? We received over 40,000 calls to our hotline, over 40,000 calls. And so as we experience an ongoing vacancy, upwards of over 100 social worker position at child protection specialist positions, you know, we had to figure out what do we do to really triage this particular social service class. We needed to figure it out. We got to $26 an hour, which has been really, really helpful. We've been doing open house events over the course of the pandemic. So we've been inviting candidates into the agency. Your fingerprints on site, you can take your test, you can get your interview, everything like a one-stop shop, right? And we were averaging around 10 or so candidates. Once we increased the starting pay, and that went into effect, this last open house event, I believe we offered 50 candidates conditional employment. They walked out of the door with a letter saying, you've been conditionally approved for employment. There were some additional steps that they would take, but wow. So that was huge. And so we're working through that process. We have a new class starting on Monday. There are about 17 candidates in this new worker class. So we're really excited. But this workforce shortage has been truly, truly impactful for all of our systems. And I know Shauna can speak to her system and how that's impacting early childhood, but it's felt across all of the systems.
Yeah, and I do want to add, JFS has a significant vacancy rate right now. Child support does as well. HR and the office and the Personnel Review Commission have been offering those in-house events with us. It's limited resources. They're down staff. And so I think we're all still catching up and recovering from COVID. We hear that from our providers. Jackie talked about the placement crisis. There are multiple providers that have multiple wings and cottages sitting vacant because they can't hire employees. We're all recovering. We have not recovered from COVID. It is going to be a duration, and then we're going to have a very difficult conversation about the economics of recovery.
David, you mentioned some folks will have to leave at 3. It's 3:10, so folks shouldn't feel obligated if they have a meeting.
I just wanted to follow up on the flip side of that, I did notice that a lot of your senior leaders that were introduced today had the title interim. Can you explain why that is, especially if you're looking to hold on to people? Some may say that's a risky term,
Yeah.
for some.
Yeah, so, first off, this is an employee market. We have some of the best and brightest employees in Cuyahoga County in the state of Ohio working for us. And some of them have been recruited. They've been headhunted and taken over to other organizations. We are approaching a transition. I'm stating the obvious. And there will be a period where some of us won't know if we're going to stay employed. Some people have made the decision it's the time for them to leave, it's time for them to retire. And then some people have also just, as was the case with COVID, many people felt like at the end of COVID they were ready for another chapter in their life and they moved on. So I introduced Sabrina Roberts. Although she's in an interim, she has a position behind her that she's serving in this role, but still has another civil service behind her. Jackie's in an interim. She's actually senior leadership at DCFS, so she's going to be here no matter what. Sabrina's going to be here no matter what. I introduced Shauna Rohrman. Shauna's got a position behind her. She's going to be here no matter what. And Natasha Petricola, the other interim right now, she too is one of the top leadership members within DSAS. And so the reality is we've gone through a tremendous amount of turnover this year. Marcos has been in this role now for 3-4 months. He's new as well, despite being with the county for going on 25 years. We've all gone through this. We've all seen the turnover.
Doesn't it also speak a little bit to, and I don't mean to interrupt you, a little bit to sort of, as you said, we're going through a transition and some of your positions may in fact, and I think it's public, may in fact be confirmationable positions and sort of agreements that were worked out between the executive and council for the new executive to come.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's correct. In the past, the only position that was confirmed was my position, the Director of Health and Human Services. County Council has changed that policy. We now are in a position where not only will my position be confirmed, the Director of DCFS, the Director of Job and Family Services, and the Director of Division of Senior Adult Services will also have to be confirmed. So any candidate that is newly brought forward will go through a confirmation process well, and that just changes the nature of those jobs.
And there are a number of jobs, most of you probably know when the new charter government came on, a number of jobs are confirmation jobs. My current, one of the many jobs that I do is a county confirmation job, the clerk of courts, David's job, the sheriff. There's a handful that are outlined. HR, that's the same reason Sheba's still in an interim role. That's a confirmationable job. So there's certain ones delineated.
And I'll say that when those staff, those leaders left, it was a hard loss. But the flip side is we weren't going to replace, we weren't going to bring somebody in permanently in the waning months of this administration. I think it wouldn't really be fair to the person if, in fact, they're not really clear that they'd be able to keep their job.
Reverend Chalker.
And just a comment to follow up on the others' important questions. I want to commend you too for a statement you made early on that you wanted to make sure that within the Department of County Health and Human Services that you didn't want your processes to get in the way of the people who needed the service. And I commend you for that because that's so important. I go back to the days of 1988 and being involved with what led to the establishment of homeless services in Cuyahoga County. And as an individual who is involved in helping an agency actually deal with the homeless population that we experienced, actually delivering the service. Sometimes the bureaucracy of dealing with how you're funded as a service provider and getting reimbursed so you can hire people or you can have people be helpful, that did get in the way of providing the service. And I'm just really glad that there's that spirit that is manifesting itself in your agency.
I want to thank you for that. I think every one of the individuals behind me and the teams behind them all lament the fact that we all too frequently have to focus on the bureaucracy first. I want to acknowledge it's aspirational. We know what we have to do, getting to it is the challenge, and then doing it every single day and improving on it is the challenge. Every one of them wants to do more quality work. All of them are challenged to do quantity work. And I think but what we need largely is community support. We need some understanding from the community that unless either we take risks or unless we accept some changes within our system, we're gonna continue to be the lowest common denominator, which is bureaucracy, which will meet a basic need, but will not sustain a person beyond their condition.
Good observation, Reverend Chalker. Thank you for the response. Any other questions, Libby?
I just wanted to bring to your attention that there are several HHS departments that are doing their own diversity and racial equity work. And so I wanted to spotlight one today, that program that just really stood out to me, and that's under Invest in Children. And if Shauna, if you just take a few seconds just to tell me about that program. It's very interesting and it may intersect with what we're doing here. So.
Thank you for highlighting it. So we're in the middle, actually, of a very exciting planning process. I'll just give you some brief background. In 2019, April of 2019, we brought a woman named Maureen Joseph from Tulane to Cleveland at an event that was co-sponsored by Invest in Children, Starting Point, Pre-Ferclea, and Groundwork Ohio to talk about equity, and specifically equity in the early childhood space. She was incredible, and our director at the time, Dr. Rebecca Dorman, followed up with her and was like, asked her, what can we do? And so their conversations continued, and where we landed is this really exciting professional development opportunity for preschool educators. There's lots of research out there showing that there's racial bias in preschool classrooms, which specifically leads to Black children and Black boys being expelled at higher rates than their counterparts from preschool. Like, we should not be seeing expulsion in preschool because they're deemed to have more behavioral problems. There's a variety of things there, but its roots are in racial bias, implicit racial bias. But there's nothing out there that we could find that is a curriculum for teachers and childcare staff to help them do their own work to reduce that bias in the classroom. So we're in the planning phase now of what we're calling EPIC, EEPC, Equity for Educators in Preschool Classrooms. Are taking what Maureen Joseph developed for graduate students in pursuing a licensed professional counselor certification or degree, and adapting it for early childhood staff. And the meat of this experience is a 10-week participation in what's called a racial identity processing group. I'm actually participating in one right now. There are two groups that we're working with. They're split by racial affinity. One is a group of white women, and a group of predominantly Black women. It's a women of color group or person of color group, but again, we're all women. And we're processing our own racial identities separately, talking about what is race, what does it mean to be the race that you are, what experiences have you had in your racial body, and how do you think about it, how do you talk about it, what are the emotions that go along with it. We're literally in, I think I just completed week 6. So we're moving through this curriculum and eventually getting to a point where we can come back together and talk about what we learned, with the goal of not only raising our own awareness about how race is coloring our, it's not an intended pun, but coloring our view, and to be able to have actual productive conversations around race with people who are not of our own same racial group, and then to recognize when these biases pop up in the classroom in ways that we may not ever really recognize until we've had the time to sort of think and talk through that. So this is a planning phase. The end of this phase is to think about how we change the curriculum to fit a preschool educator, and then pursuing funding to pilot that. And so this is one example of what Sabrina was talking about with that really deep work. It's very interesting to be participating in different kinds of DEI work at different levels and different depths, and sort of seeing what what is impacting me as a person who's continually learning. So we're really excited about this.
If I could just say one last part on it. Actually, that exchange there was well fielded by Levine. Aside from the 13 or 14 directors that report to me, I would say that Levine Ross is probably the other sort of dotted line director to Health and Human Services as council staff to us. And aside from Matt Carroll, she's probably the person that I call most in the county to talk through things. And although she works for council, we have different bosses. I consider her to be sort of in the same affinity group as the folks sitting behind me.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you, each and every one of you. Well done, and this was extremely helpful. More to come. I imagine we'll have questions and observations, and to Sabrina's point earlier, we'll figure out how to communicate with David the work that you're doing so that the community can better understand it, because probably unless you're affected by it directly, and even then, you don't know anything other than what you're affected by and the response you're getting. You probably don't know a lot that goes on with Health and Human Services. So part of our job is to educate, so to get the right resources when they need it.
Thank you.
Okay? All right. Very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna zip through this. Lenora, and come on up and offer your 22 seconds.
Yes, I'll try to speed
I'll try
through
to
it.
get a little more time than that. I thought I'd set the bar.
Okay, Ricky had a presentation. Don't get alarmed. I use the presentations, the PowerPoint, as a reference tool so that you can refer to it later with the information. So I'm going to speed through it. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I was asked to do an update on 3 of our projects. That is the equity assessment tool, the diversity, equity, and inclusion scorecard, and the GEAR survey. So next, I did want to say that thanks to the CACE report and the 21 Equity Commission, internal Equity Commission report, recommending that there needed to be a cabinet level decision. The Department of Equity and Inclusion is actually approximately 18 months old. So next, that ordinance was approved last May. It outlined some of the responsibilities. Next, it also outlined a lot of the partners, Citizens Advisory Council on Equity, who were supposed to coordinate and work through several issues. And similarly, I wanted to highlight, even though David Merriman mentioned that we're budgeted for 9 FTEs, but like every other county or agency, external entities, we are being short-staffed. I would say for those 18 months, we probably were full staff, maybe 3 or 4 months. But we consider ourselves small but mighty, and we're working to continue through the projects that we want to implement so we can continue the momentum of making changes in the county to advance equity and inclusion. Next. So the first item is the equity assessment tool. It's basically a tool that can be used to do, next slide, a step-by-step evaluation of how your policy, programs, and procedures are impacting or maybe disparate in impacting one demographic in a more disparity compared to other demographics, or a certain demographic is not benefiting from the program when it was supposed to be as similar to others. It's a way to take a pause, evaluate, and step through your process and programs to determine what needs to be changed to make sure your impact is not disparate among any particular group. It's best to be done early in the process, but again, it's always can be done later on. It's also an iterative process. So once you learn, you evaluate, you assess, and you can come back and reevaluate it. Next slide. So for the equity assessment tool that we developed for the county, it includes the content areas indicated in the first bullet point. There's an overview just in general. Also some outline of the programs that's provided by the department. What's the point of the program? What was the intent? What's the audience? What's the funding source? What are those requirements, as you stated, the bureaucracy? What are the things that you must do based on the funding source? The next 3 areas of the bullet is to look at what's the data plan? What are you gathering data to see how the project is performing? Is that data disaggregated? And from that, is there gaps in data so that you can come up with a data improvement plan? The other component is also to look at who's benefiting from the program or who is burdened by the program. So again, based on that assessment, using the data and also taking into account the overall intent of the project or program, you can make an improvement plan there.
Finally, you want to look at, are you engaged in the community? Because a lot of times you develop a program based on what you intend to solve a solution, but you don't reach out to those who are directly impacted. And again, from that assessment, you come up with an improvement plan. And I wanted to bring up one example quickly where this was used, not this exact equity tool, but a tool was used. I forgot the region, but they were looking to impact. There was a significant amount of youth that were not showing up to their court cases. So once they do not show up for their court cases, then it exacerbates the problem. So the one solution was, let's give them text reminders. That way we can send them a text reminder about their upcoming court dates and see what's the impact. So they did the first analysis after they started sending the text reminders. And if they looked at just the overall group, there was an increase in youth that were, a decrease in the amount of youth that were missing their court dates because they were getting these reminders. But the importance was they went back. They didn't just take the overall data. They went back and disaggregated the data. So while there was an improvement in the youth that were showing up for their court cases, they realized that the children of color, the youth of color, were still not benefiting from that program. So they used that assessment of that program to also look, well, we came up with the plan and we implemented it and we got disaggregated data, but we didn't go and talk to the people, the youth. So they did a survey with the youth that were involved in the system and found out, okay, what's going on? And we sent you these reminders and a couple of things came out. First, youth of color did not want a text coming from the government or the police department reminding them about a court date. Second, they found out from a lot of the youth of color that there was a transportation issue. So yeah, they got the text reminder, but they did not have transportation to the court case, to make it to the court case. So again, that showed the importance because they were able to not only look at the data, but then they realized the importance of getting the disaggregated data. And then even from that, you needed to look at who was impacted and come back and figure out, when you reached out to the community itself, and figure out what are some solutions that can augment better results. So again, that's our goal with using this equity assessment tool within our own policies and programs. And you may not, as similar to with the text message with the court cases, the goal is to look, evaluate, assess, and keep doing the iterative process to make improvements. So our process, we did 2 trainings this year. That was August, and both of them were in August. That obviously the departments are the SMEs on the programs and policies and intent. They do the work, but they can work, once they submit their analysis, they'll submit it to DEI, and we all as a team will work together to talk through that process to see if we can come up with solutions and ways that we can implement a plan to make the process better. So next slide, that's the point of the equity assessment tool. The experience and some of the videos that are listed here are also have very good specific examples where people have used the equity tool to evaluate their programs and what those impacts were, to show that even though it may seem cumbersome answering different questions, gathering the data, but you can see where you can come out with these impacts or improvements that can be used to implement in your policies and programs that have an overall impact that increases the positive impacts or lessens the burdens, where it's not a disparity among different groups demographically. Next slide, please. Next one. The next item was the diversity, equity, and inclusion scorecard. That's another internal document that we're looking to provide, developed by my department. We're looking to provide a guideline, like a checklist of ideas that departments can do in different areas. The 3 areas are supplier diversity. What are certain things, whether you purchase 1 item a year or 50 contracts, 300 contracts a year, whether your funding sources allow diversity goals or do not. What is it that you can do to provide opportunities for a more diverse vendor pool to submit and participate in the process? Also, what are the things that you can do for workforce equity, as Sabrina mentioned? There's the internal equity. How do we make sure we're recruiting, we're hiring, promoting staff at a broad demographic? So again, what are the things that you can do? Having diverse interview panels, working with HR to have outreach outreach, as they talked about the different outreach where you can go to try to, for instance, if you're looking for engineering, maybe you work with the National Society of Black Engineers to make sure postings come through there. Law departments there, for a law position, there may be the Women's Law Bar Associations for the, I know WATF is the risk managers part. So again, this outreach efforts you can do to attract a broad pool. As far as promoting and recruiting, looking at how you assign licenses, how you assign duties inside your department. How do you train departments so it's not where there's access among different people within your department. Again, people have implicit bias, and there's also where if you don't have standardized and documented access to information, then everyone may not get the training that they need to and feel that opportunity to grow. And one example, I remember I have a friend, not at the county, but he worked at Verizon. And when he started, there were no manuals or anything on how to do his job. He was an African-American male. There were cubicles. So the joke was that he said he went dumpster diving. He would stay around work late at night and he would go through the recycle bins to learn his job. Then he, maybe 6 months later, his boss hired his friend. They happened to be of the same race, and it's not necessarily that his boss was racist, but it's because of the comfort of those two being of that same demographic. He literally could hear the boss spoon feeding the job to his friend. So his friend, the new employee, had quicker progression on adapting and learning the job, whereas he had to do dumpster diving because there were no manuals or processes and evaluations. So again, we're looking at internally, how do we train our staff? How do we provide access to licenses and training development? Evaluate that and look at how we can improve those to do better. And the third area, again, is programs, policies, and service equity in those areas. We developed a few tools. I just mentioned the equity assessment tool. Also, earlier this year, we did the equity zones map and policy. So we have these tools. Are we using them? And I kind of use myself as an example. I've had this excellent Nordic track elliptical in my basement. But if I don't use the tool, it doesn't impact. So again, that's part why it's on the scorecard for the departments. Are you using the equity zones map to evaluate applicable programs and give that additional consideration to projects that have a geographical component? Have you picked a policy or program that you're implementing and used the equity assessment tool to evaluate and come up with an implementation plan? Have you, are you collecting disaggregated data? So that was the point of the DEI scorecard. This is the first year, it's inaugural. So as we grow, as we learn, we'll make changes. Next slide. It went out today. So all the different directors got their preliminary scorecard. It's a give and take, it's not a gotcha. That's not what it's about. It's about looking at those 3 areas and working with the department to say, hey, this is an area, these are things that you could do to improve supplier diversity. This is what you can do to improve workforce equity and programming and policy. For instance, for the Department of Equity and Inclusion, we're expanding a new department. One of the areas because as I stated, we haven't been full capacity probably a couple months, a year, and we lost our manager, which has a long history of experience. So we definitely want to make sure that we have a strong training program, because we know based on just in general, even without the current market strain, there's going to be people incoming, and we want to make sure that there's that access. So that's the area that I'm finding as a weakness in my scorecard that I want to improve. Another area for the supplier diversity that I know I want to use the equity assessment tool is that we did the informal bidding process where we're making departments as part of that informal process. These are low purchases that are less than $50,000, have a less onerous competitive process, have a quicker turnaround, so they have a less of a cash burden on vendors. We're providing outreach to companies, letting them know that these are opportunities, but I want to do an evaluation of the program to see, A, are they taking advantage of those opportunities? Take the opportunity to do the actual community engagement with the vendors and find out, are you getting these messages? Why are you not responding? Or what would be more helpful as far as getting those information? So again, it's not a gotcha scorecard. It's a guide scorecard to help guide you with your development. And that is the point of the DI scorecard. So again, that went out today to the county departments and agencies. Over the next month, we'll work with departments and hopefully come up with where we can all come up with an area that we're gonna look and improve in those 3 areas. Next slide. Again, some more videos that are applicable. And I have the PowerPoint here, so I'm not that I'm expecting you to remember those, but those were some good resources. Next slide. That completes the scorecard. Next slide. So we completed the GEAR, Racial Equity and Employee Survey. This is our 2nd full year membership in GEAR. As part of that membership, they will do a survey, the Racial Equity and Employee Survey to help you implement it. This is our first year, so we did the base. We're hoping to do the baseline, use this as a baseline. It assesses your employees' knowledge of themselves, of racial equity tools and the impact, and also their awareness about what the county or their entity that they work for is providing. And then you can use it based on the feedback that comes from those and findings from those that report, help guide your efforts and strategies going forward. Next slide. The recommendation is that you do it every 2 to 3 years. So again, as I stated, it was we work with the communications department to do the outreach because GEAR requires a 40% response rate. And as you know, you probably do it yourself. When I talk to communications about it, they're like, whoa, 40%. Most of the time for surveys, you only get less than 10% response. And they not only they want 40%, it had to be complete studies for them to even be able to do the analytics. So we work with communications to come up with an outreach and awareness campaign. The survey was actually active from June 21st through July 22nd. We were successful. We had out of about 3,000 employees, more than 3,000 to 4,000 employees, we got 2,308 survey responses. And of those 2,308, 2,115 were actually at the level that GEAR found statistically complete for them to be usable and do the study. We got the final report back late last week. Working with communication, we've loaded onto the internet. So again, we're trying to keep the momentum going to the internet site. We bombarded the employees about doing the survey. So now we want to bombard them with the information on what it said. We're excited. Those reports are going out this week. We're looking to do a mass. I'm not sure if it's going to be an Armin's in the know message or if there might be a separate message just to let them know. We appreciate them taking the time to do the survey. The survey was more than 50 questions. So to get a significant response that shows that there is a commitment by employees and an engagement by employees in general to keep advancing and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's other items in there that was just about the other items, but I know we're past the meeting.
Okay, so who will the results be shared with from the GEAR, from the internal? We see the number of responses, respondents complete. Who and when will it be shared with?
So I'm working out that we got them last week, so I'm pretty, we're sharing it internally with the internet, so I'm pretty sure we'll probably share it publicly.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
All right, so we've got a February reporting for some of the other things, then relatively soon reporting for the GEAR. We are, unless there's a pressing question someone has, we're going to move on quickly. Are we going to hear from Director Marshall? Yeah.
I'll literally make it a 30-second blast. Thank you, Lenore, for mentioning quite a few things that we're working on together. I won't go back over those. Right now, we have out an operational and organizational assessment. That is simply to see if we are right-sized, if we have enough employees in the county doing the right jobs. We have that assessment out, and that was driven by the fact that from 2019 to today, we're down about 800 employees, and you heard about the shortages and things like that. We want to make sure that as we're hiring back, we're hiring for the right places to do the right jobs, people in the right positions, we're structurally set up soundly. So we have an operational, organizational assessment out for that. But I'm looking for what I can do with that going down the road. So as we're looking forward, I'm also interested in a performance management system. I'm interested in succession planning. And I'm interested in seeing who's where doing what jobs and using that information down the road to continue to work on our equity initiatives. So that's my new stuff. That's it.
Good news. Perfect. Thank you. We're going to forego committee reports and some of the other things we normally talk about, because when we get together in a different setting in December, we'll go over some of these things so we can plan and strategize for 2023. Fair? Okay. The GARE report will be sent by email, yes. So thank you.
And very quickly, there's no update in terms of the critical race theory bills or the congressional redistricting, because the legislator is on recess until after the elections.
Was there a hand raised?
Meeting December 12th.
Pardon me?
December 12th.
No, as the chair said, we're gonna cancel that meeting. I'll have Latia send out a notice of cancellation. There will not be a meeting on December 12th, I think.
We're gonna have a meeting where we can talk differently. Okay. Pardon me?
It won't be that day.
It won't be that day.